and I was saying that it's been a very long, very challenging harvest. So talking to people that I don't work with is a very welcome experience for me. And tasting wines that are finished and have been in bottle is also a very welcome experience for me. It's all a treat. So my name is Svetlana. I'm one of the 4 partner owners of Morissette. But my odyssey, so to speak, started a long time ago when I was a sommelier in Toronto for many years. And I happened to be one of the 2 people that actually loved and believed in Morissette at a time when nobody knew about it. So at that point, I had started a small little place called Ascari. That's now like pretty significant. It's got a few locations. The other people that really stood behind the wines of Morissette was the team at Canoe. So it just happened to stumble here, love the wines, had no idea why I love them, because it's, as a sommelier, you don't really get taught the ins and outs of production. You just get taught all sorts of references and how to not necessarily even assess, but how to catalog wine. And it's important knowledge. But when you get triggered by something on a deeper level, you don't really have the capacity to understand why or how. And I happen to be a nerd in the sense of, even when I was working as a sommelier, I always cared a lot more about why things or why wines drink the way they do, as opposed to describing the wines in a particular way. So very shortly, the day after I stumbled on Morissette, I took my vacation and started coming and helping out here and working and learning about the processes themselves. Now that's 10 years ago now. It's going to be 10 years next year. And it's been a roller coaster of a ride. Morissette's become something that neither one of us imagined it would be. When I started, there was me, Francois, who's the winemaker, an office person, and like another person that was taking care of the animals. Now, between the restaurant, the garden, and the winery, we're up to 50 people on staff, which even when I say it, it's like rather mind-blowing. But everything that happens on this property happens in the same type of vein. It's inspired by the same type of ethos, which is acknowledging where you work in, understanding your environment to the best of your capacity, and hopefully understanding your environment better and better each year, and then responding to it intelligently. So the way the wines are made, the way our restaurant team cooks, the way we grow vegetables in the garden, that supply not only the restaurant, but a country market itself, is a function of everybody's relationship towards Niagara. And that relationship is based on not trying to force Niagara into a mold, not trying to imitate and emulate and try to resemble any other place that may or may not be a reference in the world, but discovering what is the inherent character of this place and using our craft and hopefully elevating our craft every single year in order to express it with as much transparency and produce results of quality that in turn can intrigue people and bring a lot of pleasures, hopefully, in their lives. Because whether it's food in the restaurant or the wines that we do, or the vegetables and the fruit that are necessary to produce the food in the restaurant, everything revolves around the simplest, most basic, and yet most life-changing, without trying to sound like too grand over there, of ideas, which is giving people pleasure and giving, like, making, like, doing it in a way that makes them curious about the place that all these things come from. And you know, I always say, what's the wine's first job is to make you want to drink and eat more. So Pearl Morissette, Zern, like, knock on wood, quite the reputation. It far supersedes any of our dreams or aspirations. But truly and honestly, it's just like the simplest of paths and the most direct of results of looking around us and examining everything that's given to us from the environment as materials, and using our abilities to produce something that affects us and in turn affects other people. So I don't want to get too philosophical. That's one of my, you know, weak or strong points, depends on the worldview. But what I would suggest, and we'll go through all of the wines, is please, 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 please feel free to interrupt, whether it's in the chat or whether you're just asking a question, because I want to be able to answer all of the questions that you may possibly have. Don't be apprehensive about sharing like your experiences about the wine, whether positive or negative, and please don't shy away from asking anything. Because as I always say, like, I train our staff in the restaurant and I've trained many staffs all over the place. Ultimately, like, what you perceive on your palate from the wine is the most important thing. What I'm here for is to give you context of why can you possibly like be tasting something and why it is there. Now, I'm not saying that we will be able to explain anything and everything, but I've known every single one of the wines we're tasting today since they were not even grapes, since they were flowers on the vine, and will be more than happy to share their journey and to give you like just a spectrum of all the influences that every wine has been under until it got into the bottle and now it is in your glass. So yes.
Great little intro.
Interrupt. Interrupt.
That was the first thing that you said, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So yeah, so let's get on to the wine, and pretty excited about that. So I'm
going to give you a very short, synthesized version of what we do here and how we do it. And again, if you have any questions, ask them, interrupt me. Since day one, Pearl Morissette has always done wines in an extremely traditional way. Extremely traditional way means, in our case, that all of the wines since day one have always been fermented only by the yeast that comes on the grapes from the vineyard. There is nothing put into the wine in order to design the outcome. And for those of you that may or may not know, a lot of the wines being made of the world, actually the large majority of them, are being made with the inclusion of many different ingredients. By law, there are over 200 different ingredients you can put into wine without disclosing them. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're not gonna kill anyone, but there are tools in the tool belt of a winemaker with which he or she can choose to mold the wine to be a particular way, whether that is the current in vogue, like expression of a, of a certain grape, let's say Chardonnay or Riesling, whether it's catering to prevailing tastes or it's catering to their own personal tastes, it doesn't matter. There are many tools with which you can do that. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. We just happen to be on the exact opposite end of this paradigm, where we do not use any artificial yeast. We do not use any enzymes or any of those other 200 ingredients you can put into wine. And we allow the quote unquote designer of the wine to be, this will sound hippie, but like it's completely true, to be nature itself. And when it comes to wine, that means the site and the soil of where the grapes are grown. The growing season is of incredible importance in Niagara, as it is in like many other places, but in Niagara even more so because the climate here is like a windshield wiper from one year to another. You don't know where you're gonna end up. So the way the wines express will be extremely greatly dependent on that. And what our job as winemakers is not to design the wine, not to mold it, not to make it fit into a mold, but to make sure that is pristine in terms of its quality. Then when the core is sound, how the wine wants to express its outside of like what we strive for, it is, as I said, like up to all these factors that I quoted. So from one vintage to another, here at Pearl Morissette, you can have great diversity and I guess consistency in terms of character. Has never been an aspiration for us, just because you cannot have consistency in a climate like that. Where we strive for consistency is the quality, and we're fortunate enough to be able to export wine all over the world. Most of it actually goes to Europe, all across Europe, where people, whether it's like we export a lot to Germany, Austria, France, England, Spain, people are taken by the wines, and it's not because of us per se. What I always say, because we go there and like we visit our agents and we visit our accounts, and they always say we've never tasted wines like that. And I'm like, that is Niagara. The whole idea of the singularity of terroir is, we hope, is in those wines, because a lot of the times what happens is people feel that if your wines are not an emulation, an imitation of pre-existing references, somehow that's not enough. Or if they're close to those pre-existing references, somehow that is a strike or like a feather in your cap a statement towards quality. And I dare to completely disagree with this, because quality is a very, very, very objective thing in wine. Singularity is also a very objective thing in wine. And the fact that the wines can be so different and express so different is not a statement of our personal originality. It's a statement towards the originality of Niagara and the potential of it as a viticultural region to become a reference in
Svetlana,
the long run.
you were talking about like origin and everything, and there's a question that just came in the chat, and it made me think of something else. The question is about the name of Morissette itself, but could you also talk a little bit about why you are stationed in Jordan Station? Why Jordan Station? Why specifically that area? And what is it about the Niagara Peninsula? Because you talked a little bit about like the fact that it's a climate and how it's affected. How, like, could you go a little bit more in depth in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name, it's very simple actually. The two, like now there's like 4 partners that own Pearl Morissette, but the 2 original partners were Mel Pearl and Francois Morissette. Hence the name Pearl Morissette. It's their last names. To this day, even 10 years in, I still get emails that say Dear Pearl, because a lot of people think my name is Pearl Morissette, but it is simply a combination of the 2 last names of the original partners. Why in Jordan per se? It's not necessarily any overarching vision, but originally when the winery was established, which was 2007, it was not even a winery, but it was a real estate purchase that Mel Pearl, who is the financial partner behind the winery, made on 19th Street Vineyard, which is our top vineyard now with the oldest vines on it. And he simply made it because it was right across the road from where Clos Jourdain at the time was supposed to build in collaboration with Boisset, which is a big French negociant, winery designed by Frank Gehry. So for him at that point, it was just a real estate purchase. He happened to meet Francois, who's the winemaker, a year after, and decided that, as most people decide, like the second most popular thing after opening a restaurant is like doing a winery. When, you have enough capital, and well, it's also very valid what people say. It's like how you make money in wines in restaurants. It's like how you make a little money by starting with a lot of money. It's not a it's not a high return business, to say like the least. So met Francois and then decided to start making wine. And at that point, Francois was just coming back. He had spent like 10 years in Burgundy, working for, Frederic Meunier and Rouleau, like just the shining lights of Burgundian winemaking. And when he came back to, but Burgundy is Burgundy, and it's great on many levels. And there is also many challenges over there as well. So coming back to Canada, even though Francois is originally Quebecois, he was tasting around the area and he said, like, there is something here. Let's explore it. Met Mel. In terms of like why particularly this place in Jordan, we really liked the soils that are on the property. It's an old riverbed, an old creek bed, which is, when you have an old riverbed, there's a lot of gravel and the soil is pretty much uncompactable, which is great for the health of the soils. And it's in a very funny place because it is actually at the intersection of two main roads. But if you don't know that Pearl Morissette is here, you will drive by it 1,000 times, which people in Jordan Station, that's 500 meters down the road, like a lot of them have, like they've told us they had no idea that Pearl Morissette is here. So
Guilty.
yeah,
Guilty.
there's no, we're also like kind of not making it obvious because right now there's a statue of a red cardinal, like a red cardinal bird at the entrance. But even like that's, I think like 2 or 3 years old at most. Before that, there was not even this. There are no signs, and the winery operates in a completely different way than the rest of Niagara does. Even before COVID, forever, there's been no tasting bars here. You cannot just like show up, drop in. There's no store. It's a working, operating farm. And I mean, since the restaurant opened, there is a little bit more traffic on it for people that have, with people that have reservations. But apart from it, it's not at all what you would expect in Niagara. We like to keep it that way. Again, we're not trying to be difficult. It's just the setup here is a setup that is way closer to the way wineries operate in Europe, as opposed to businesses that operate in Niagara. So everybody on the property, in one way or another, that's here on a daily basis, is involved with their own craft. And as I said, like tastings, they're not necessarily an afterthought. We just open for tastings like in September. But before that, the last time we were open for tastings was 2016. And that is a function of many things. One is like we normally don't have any wine for sale. And secondly, we just would rather sell our wines face to face, like whether it's through restaurants, through export, through the private customers that we do events with, then accommodate people that are dropping in, because that would just imply a lot more staffing. Here, when you come for tasting, the tasting like happens in the winery, is done by whoever person that is directly involved in the making of the wine. So it's completely different than what you would experience otherwise. It's a very unusual, but at the same time, for us, completely organic way of operating.
Fully agreed. And I think that answers also, I don't know if there's, I don't see a question there in chat, but I'm guessing that's going to answer right away also the question of the names of the wines, because they're in French for all of them. So that would come from, you're smiling already.
Yeah, because it's such a funny exercise, and I'll tell you about names of wines. Let's start tasting. What I have in terms of whites that I poured in my glass is Fougue. So Fougue is the Chardonnay with the black label. It comes from the vineyard right here, that if it was light outside, you can see. And my favorite story, well, it's not even a story or an anecdote to tell about it, is when people ask me what Fougue is, I'm like, it means ardor. And then people say like, what is ardor?
So it doesn't really help.
And generally, the naming of the wines, especially of the new cuvées from which we can taste a few different ones, it involves me and Francois like tasting the wine and having known its history and connecting to the wine in whatever our personal ways are. talking about its energy and trying to put that into words. So there is no rhyme or reason per se. Like, for example, like food being one of the most obvious ones from the lineup that we have. But why a Chardonnay has anything to do with ardor or like passion or perseverance is because the way that vineyard is planted right here, it's in a completely different way than all logic in Niagara will tell you to do. It is extremely high density, meaning the vines are very close to each other, which in and of itself, as hard as farming is in Niagara, when the vines are closer, it entails a lot more hardship and challenges. But we do this for a particular reason, which is to bring out the most flavor into the grapes, like as like as much as possible. Because when you don't put any of those 200 things in the wine, your only source of flavor, your only source of mouthfeel and texture is the grapes themselves. So if you don't farm properly, if you don't farm for flavor, you would never be able to make wines like that. So it takes a lot of ardor to farm a high density plantation in a place like Niagara, where 9 out of 10 vintages are extremely challenging, and not challenging for the reasons that most people think they are, which they think Niagara is cold. No, it is not. The last cold vintage, like truly cold vintage, was 2009. You have zero problems with ripening fruit in Niagara, like on any year. Well, the challenge with Niagara is that there is a lot of humidity and a lot of disease. Niagara is a beautiful region and extremely diverse in terms of its flora and fauna. You know, we are located in the middle of the green belt. For those of you that you haven't been, like, even like you drive down and there's like forests and wild vines and orchards. It is a temperate jungle over here. You compare that to Burgundy and you have a completely different environment where it's all vines, with very little of that intensity and diversity of life. Now, this is all fine and dandy. What is not fine and dandy is that diversity, resilience, and resilience of life translates also to all the pathogens that are in the area, meaning every single disease you can have, like when it comes to viticulture, you encounter here. We have a lot of friends from all over the world that are winemakers, from again, like all the different continents, and they come and visit regularly. And I still remember, like, the first time they were doing the rounds, they were absolutely dumbstruck by what is going on here. And some of our Spanish friends, such as, it's like, you know what, if you figure out how to grow in a non-intervention way here, which we do, we don't use pesticides, herbicides, or anything like that, like, you can grow grapes on the moon. Because like you go to France, Spain, Italy, and depending on the region, there may be one, there may be two diseases that you encounter on a regular basis. Here, as I said, it's the green belt. It's everything and anything. It's just the cocktail of fungi and disease depends on the year. So in that way, it can be an extreme challenge. And that is the biggest challenge, as opposed to Niagara being described as a cool climate region, because it's not. As I said, like 2009 was the last truly cool vintage. 2019 recently was cool enough, but again, you have absolutely no problem of ripening the sugars. What you have a problem with is protecting the vines from disease for long enough that they are able to develop flavor. And for us, again, that is extremely important. It's way easier when you farm conventionally because you can spray whatever you want to spray and combat the disease. But when you dedicate yourself to understanding or uncovering the balance within this little piece of land that you inhabit, without leaving a footprint on it in a harmful way, it's a different proposition. It truly is.
Svetlana, you mentioned the vintages, and unfortunately, it's getting time is passing unfortunately a little bit faster than this is fun. But
Sorry, we haven't even
time
covered any
no
of
worries,
the
no worries, no worries. Because I it's like I just wanted to bring in, like you were talking about the 2019 and whatnot, and the Fug is the 2018. So could you give us a little insight on that, on the Fug specifically 2018?
So funny that you would ask this.
Sorry.
Because, and I'm not just saying that, 2018 has been one of the most revelatory of vintages we've done. Now, our taste here, and by that I mean like Francois and me, because we always joke that ultimately we make wines for our palates, because if everyone stops buying our wines, we'll need to drink them ourselves. So we may as well make what we like to drink. It's like, it's as easy as that. And we like structure, we like texture, we like wines that are able to live for a very, very long time. Generally speaking, deeply rooted wines like that come from relatively warm / hot vintages. 2018 has been our first experience with a year where you have as much bones. I call it like it's kind of like the Notre Dame of vintages. A lot of Notre Dame before it got burnt. A lot of symmetry, a lot of classicism, a lot of things to say, but still restraint and elegance. But rather than expressing in warm fruited and warm spice register, it expresses with a little bit of like just this like cool-headedness, which to me, it brings extra elegance. We haven't released yet the top wines from 2018 that would actually be released next week once I write a newsletter. But those wines, they're not, how do I put it? Like, they can be drunk, but drinking them now is sort of comparative to committing an infanticide, because as smooth and as engaging they are now, there's so much density of nuance and power within them that will only be able to unfold as the wines continue to age. Now, the wines that are able to show a lot more of their character rather than just, the front face are the wines like Fug, and there was a Cabernet Franc called Racine du Ciel, the reverence that Joao you have, which are wines, we call them like, it's a very inelegant term, but mid-tier. And for us, mid-tier means nothing else than a little bit less aging, because the fruit source is more generous. It doesn't mean any less attention. It doesn't mean like, what's it called? Like a lesser selection. It doesn't mean any of that. It just, when you have younger vines they will give you wines that are more open and engaging earlier on in their life. So the Fug and all of the wines that you see carrying a Pearl Morissette label and having a black color label are those wines. They are hot on the heels of the top guys. And even more importantly than that, they're available to give you pleasure way earlier than the top ones. Well, so in 2018, as I said, like it's the previous vintage that I'm as passionate as I am about 2018 is 2012, and it was completely different. It was very hot, very dry. Those wines are wines for the ages, just as much as these are. But here, you not only have a lot more restraint and elegance and like cool-headedness, as I said, but hopefully, even if I say so myself, the knowledge acquired in the intervening 6 years.
At the same time, Svetlana, I'm reading the comments, and Mr. Lai just mentioned second, he mentioned that he loves the Fug, but he's also talking about a particular virus, and he wanted to know, he can't recall the name, but he wanted to know if that's been affecting, because you were talking about diseases and whatnot in Niagara. So it's many parts his comment, I should say. So the first one really would be about the diseases of the grapes, something specific that has been affecting or threatening the Niagara Peninsula's grapes.
So viruses are very different than the diseases themselves. There's a lot of different viruses in Niagara, like the one that we have on our vineyards, it's called red blotch, which is very prevalent in Niagara. And red blotch, what it does, it's not something that you can cure. It just becomes part of the DNA of the vines, and it slows down the ripening. And how you can tell it, it's because even in high season, meaning before being even close to harvesting time, the grapes, the leaves of the vines are red, as if it's October. And because they're red, they cannot photosynthesize, which in turn, slows down the ripening of the grapes. Because this is something that, even with me, that I've been in production for a long time, but even before, like I was a sommelier, you always think it's like, thinking about the grapes and how they ripen. And actually the disease that affects the ripening is not on the grapes, it's on the leaves. Because though the leaves are the factories that produce the energies for the grapes to ripen. So red blotch is all over Niagara, and a lot of the time it just comes on to the vines that are planted onto the material. It cannot be cured, but it's also not, how do I put it? It's not something that will determine the quality of the grapes you're producing. It just has to be properly managed. More so than any virus, what the struggles are year in and year out are the fungi that can obliterate your canopy, i.e. the leaves, mildew, like there's 2 different kinds of mildew, different types of rot, and like as well as like all sorts of bugs that again live on the leaves. And the moment you have no leaves, you cannot ripen grapes, because you just can't ripen grapes on sticks. So again, depends on the year, like which the plague, like it's like every year there is a plague. What plague there would be, it's actually a season. It's very rare that you have a year with very, very little disease. Last year was one of them. This year was not.
So like we talked a little bit about the food. Did you want to keep going on the food, or did you like, do you want to go into the 19e? Because I really want to know, like you hinted at it with the black label and now the white label with the 19e. I don't know if you want to.
I would love to talk about the 19e. So I hope some people have 19e opened. I actually just opened the one that I told everybody not to open, which is a 2018. Why I opened that?
I was just
because
about
I need to
tell
write
everyone.
about it.
I was just about to tell everyone, Svetlana gave us a warning. Do not open the 2018.
Yeah, and I still stand by it. As I said, I'm only opening it. It's not like I'm punishing myself, but I'm only opening it because, as I said, like I need to write about it. And that wine got when it got bottled in spring, and it is about to be released. But when it comes to 19e, I was talking earlier about the original vineyard, our 19th Street vineyard. And in that 19th Street vineyard, the purchase that Mel Per originally made, it's where we find our oldest vines. And inherently, the oldest vines will produce the wines of most complexity. So, 19e Chardonnay, Madeleine is the name of the Cabernet Franc, Black Bow is the name of the Riesling, and the Pinot Noir is just called Pinot Noir. This is what Pro Morissette's been established by. And even in that sense, from the get-go, we've been very different because we don't have like bistro, at that point, we didn't have any bistro level wines, because no matter how you spin Francois and me around, we'll always make the most complex wine possible. That is absolutely certainly not in vogue at all with the current climate of what's being drunk in the world. But we also cannot help ourselves because, as I mentioned before, those are our tastes. And on a separate level, I'm sure a lot of you have enjoyed wines from all over the world with some age on them. In order to be able to do that, somebody needs to make wines that will age. And we're lucky to be living in a time and place where we can still be on the receiving end of a lot of producers' work that have made wines with a tip of the hat towards the future. Because wine that can age, the pleasures that it'll be able to give you is not something that there is any shortcut through, and it's not something that you can force, and it's not something that you can concoct. Like there is no, absolutely zero replacement for time and patience. And it just so it happens, like I'm originally Bulgarian, Francois, even if he's Quebecois and New World in that sense, he's also very much of an old world wine type of guy. We truly and deeply believe in wines that can tell a story, not for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in advance, but for 10, 20, 30. And in order for wine to be able to do that with any sort of transparency, while being able to give you pleasure, it needs to have the bones. Niagara naturally gives you a lot of bones. So all we do is try and not mess with it. When we have the material for seriousness, we go for seriousness. And the wines from our 19th Street vineyard, from our oldest vines, are our exercise, like in tipping our hat towards the future. So every time a 19e, a Madeleine, a Black Bow gets released, this is not a wine that says, drink me now. What we're saying is, you can start drinking it but there's so much more to come. Like today, I was training the restaurant staff, and we opened some 2011s. And again, 2011, that's 4 years in the beginning of this winery. So granted, naturally, way less knowledge about the region at that point than we have now. 2011 was not necessarily a very structural vintage, but the wines are absolutely singing. That's 10-year-old Pinot, 10-year-old Riesling, 10-year-old Chardonnay, not a smidgen of tiredness. And for all intents and purposes, that is one of the most gratifying moments you can experience. You can experience as part of the creation of something like that. So a 2018 19e that's about to be released, it's our statement, and the door is starting to be open. Be patient. Like the more patient you are, the more pleasure this wine will give you. For those of you that have the previous vintages, the 2017, I actually on purpose didn't open it because that bottle is singing. It is such a beautiful vintage. It soars out of the glass. It's one of those vintages that people will tell you had a lot of problems, and it did. But the wines that came out of it are like they're just ballerinas. They like wrap around you. They've never had any attitude problems, and as easily as they drink deceptively easy because they're so, how do I put it, like it's so easy to indulge in them, but there's so much nuance and so much prettiness. So I stay away from them just as an exercise in self-protection, nothing else. And the previous vintage, 2016, that is one of those extremely solar sun-filled vintages, much like 2020 or 2012, that is going to live for a while. So if you're a fan of concentrated, almost like beeswaxy flavors, 2016 it is. It's like already, again, like 5 years in, drinking beautifully, but you shouldn't be afraid to store this for at least another 10 years, like at the minimum. So every time you see a white label for Morissette with like a colored foil, yellow for Chardonnay, purple for Cabernet Franc, green for Riesling, that is our top tier, and our top tier is not defined by expensive barrels, which a lot of people do. We have no such thing here as special reserve, extra special, super, whatever, blah, blah, blah reserve. Everything is defined by the inherent character of the fruit that the vineyard gives us. And in our case, the most evanescent, the most meaningful and significant things to us is fruit that can tell a story for decades into the future. And these wines, the wines with the white label, we give them all our patience. Just to give you an example, even though the 17s got released last year, they're now like long sold out. The 15s, just because of the nature of the vintage, got released in a year ago in November last year. So the 15s took 5 years to reach that point of putting the door just a little bit ajar. And that's fine. They'll take the time it takes because we do believe in giving our patience to those wines. They are our pride and joy, and if we can only make wines like this, we would. But I mean, we have vineyards that have vines that are different age. So they express in a completely different way. So just as we will never simplify those wines, we will never take fruit that just wants to be exuberantly, like exuberant, vivacious, loquacious, whatever you want to call it, and put it in new oak or all those other tricks that people do and make it appear like something like way more than it is. Just don't do that. It's not
You
the
know,
Paul Morissette way.
Svetlana, what I'm really enjoying hearing, and I already had this feeling from you when I went to visit you specifically this summer. Every year, you don't know what you're gonna get, and what I love, what like listening to you, what you're saying is that it evolves so much. So even though this is the same grape, the same region, they're completely different. And that resonates very strongly to me, what you're saying. And that's what I find so exciting and interesting about these three. Unfortunately, I don't have those three in front of me. Hopefully,
No,
some
but
of
this
our members do.
for me, this is, I mean, people take this for granted when we talk about other different, like other regions, like regions that are already established references. A lot of the wine literature that's being published out there is discussion as to the different qualities of the vintages in such and such region, be it Burgundy, be it Moselle, whatever it is. There's zero, how do you put it, like zero discussion about consistency of character. I don't know how and where along the road this narrative breaks, and all of a sudden we expect consistency out of like our own region. And it goes back to what I was saying previously. Like what we strive here is consistency of quality. Francoise and mine's aspirations are every single wine that bears a Pearl Morissette label, like must be at a world-class quality, must stand shoulders to shoulders with all sorts of wines from around the world. And so far, so good. Those wines do retail at the same prices in euros in Europe, next to the wines of like a lot more established regions. But consistency of character is something completely different, because if you want a consistent character, you need to impose it. You're working with nature. And in 2017, the beaches in Toronto Island got washed out. The orchards around here were flooded. In 2016, it was a desert for like 18 weeks. You cannot have consistency of character if you're true to your region and representing what this season gave you. All you can aspire is that you make equally great wines in terms of quality with the building blocks that the season gives you. Then what people like, it's up to their taste, which is completely subjective. And like with Pearl Morissette, I mean, we've been lucky enough over the years to build a base of supporters that I know a lot of them on a personal basis, that I know it's like, if you like the 2012s, you like the 2016s, you like the 2020s, you most likely will not like the 2017s. So taste is subjective, and nobody can argue that my taste is more informed or better than yours, and all sorts of other stuff like that. Depends on background, time and place you share those wines, all of that stuff. That is subjective. That is for us to discover, like while enjoying the wines. But quality is completely objective. And that's what we're striving for.
So Svetlana, we're going from back in time, 2016. We take a look now at the reds, and we're going into the younger, actually, the younger vintages.
Let's
So
do it.
I had to say, like, I love the Lamberger label. Gorgeous, gorgeous,
Thank
gorgeous,
you.
gorgeous. And not just the label, but the wine itself, actually. Really, really, really good.
So funny story about the Lamberger, because a lot of people are very, it's like, why are you doing Lamberger? And this is like one big, it's not even a secret about Pro Morissette. We are not these geniuses that are over strategizing into the future and hold the keys to all sorts of Venus secrets. When you're paying, again, attention to the environment you inhabit, the environment is very good at telling you what you should be paying attention to. So Lemberger for us, it's 100% like just a stroke of luck. We were working with a farmer in Niagara-on-the-Lake, like 20 minutes away from here, buying Gewürztraminer from it, because we really like working with Gewürztraminer for that irreverence joie that you have. And we were asking him, he's Slovakian, that guy, like, does he have any reds? We're not thinking about Lemberger, we're just Cabernet Franc, blah, blah, blah. And he said, like, we do have some reds, but you won't want them. And we said, like, why wouldn't we want them? He said, it's like, it's just what the big wineries get in order to beef up their quote unquote Bordeaux blends. Because by law in Ontario with the VQA, you're allowed to put up to 15% of a grape variety without disclosing it on the label. And Lemberger happens to be a grape variety that has a lot of color and a lot of flavor and can bring a lot of acidity, which can also be very useful. So all of their production was going into humongous wineries and they were blending it in. It's also like cheaper than Cabernet Sauvignon to buy it. And that's what they were growing. That's what it was being used for. And I said, no, of course, we would like to take a look at it because why not? And we went and we saw the vineyards, and the first vintage that we did, the first Lila, somebody was having the 2019, the first Lila was 2018, was made from those grapes because in a very hard vintage, very tough vintage, those plants didn't care. They were just healthy and happy. And this, again, is a statement that this grape belongs, it's adapted. And when you make wines the way we do, the adaptation of the grape to the environment, it's where it all must start. Because that entails way less intervention in the vineyard, way less spraying, way healthier fruit. And because you have way healthier fruit, you don't need to intervene in the winery. One follows the other. So he gave us 1 ton in 2018. We absolutely loved it. We made the first Lila, which is what, Bar Isabel, like Itzao, Bar Raval, all bought. They've been great supporters for a while. Since then, like the next year, we bought half of the fruit of the vineyards, and now we buy all of the fruits. And they're Slovakian. As I said, I'm Bulgarian. Francois believes that they like us a lot because of the Eastern European connection. I truly believe it's a lot more than that, including the fact that these are people that really care. Now they grow the fruit organically the way we ask them to, because for us that is extremely important. But on a very personal note, until we started making wine from their grapes, they had never tasted the wine made from their grapes. And that is, like, to me, that is insane. Because, that is the difference between producing grapes as just this product and selling it by the container
Mm.
for it to disappear in a huge tank somewhere and for you to never know the outcome of it, as opposed to working the vineyard, growing the grapes, and then a year later, somebody bringing you a bottle that has only your grapes in it. And you actually, again, without sounding too hippie, you get to taste the fruits of your labor. And Lemberger, apart from Cabernet Franc and Gamay, I absolutely am completely convinced, and not even apart, alongside Cabernet Franc and Gamay is the future. Like
Mm.
it's again, like you don't need to um, overthink it. All you need to do is go in the vineyard and see how the grapes behave, how the vines show in a difficult vintage. And people are always like, oh, not people, like people like as in other winemakers, who's gonna buy Lemberger? I'm like, everybody. As long as the wine is good. I don't think people are given enough credit for being as open-minded as they are. This is our third year, the 2020, of doing Lemberger, and it's sold out every year.
I think it speaks
Because
for
the
itself.
wine is great. The wine is great. It has a particular character, and you tell people what it's all about, and you just put another stroke into defining what Niagara can do.
I, I can see some of our members are tasting the wine, so hopefully you're liking it as much as I liked it when I had the chance to taste
And I
it not
gotta
that
tell
long
you
ago.
guys, this came from our library, and all the wines that you have, this actually was sold out in August. So the opinion offer, it actually pulled from our library, because we do keep about 10 to 20% in library in order to age wine and see them how they develop. But yesterday I was doing a Zoom tasting, and it wasn't the Prim Sautier, like it was different types of wines, but also like some of them were from library, and I was not even able to taste them. And I was so looking forward to being back on the property today, because I knew the Prim Sautier will be part of this tasting, and I had not tasted this wine since it's been sold out. But it was my drink for the summer, and like tasting it right now, I'm only reinforcing my opinion that as wonderful as it drinks, and this is a wine that you can do with everything and anything, it still has miles to go, like truly.
And you mentioned a little bit the Cap Franc, one of my absolute favorite varietals of all time. So I think it's many members and many wine lovers' favorite varietals. What can you tell us about this one?
Okay, so when Francois Morissette first came here, he said Cabernet Franc over my dead body. True story, and not because he had anything against that grape variety, but because, as I said, he's a Burgundy man, trained in Burgundy. Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc are very different grapes. So it's almost like, what do I know about Cabernet Franc? This is supposed to be Pinot country, because to this day, this is the narrative about Niagara, that it's Pinot country. And we here at Pearl Morissette dare to disagree with this profoundly. And again, I'm coming at this from a place where I'm working now for 10 years side by side with a person that's worked with and learned from arguably, I mean, the brightest of luminaries in Burgundy. So he knows Pinot, is what I'm saying. Now, going back to listening to nature, like, here's a guy that knows what there is to know about Pinot, or a large extent of it, says Cabernet Franc over my dead body. and makes the first Cabernet Franc in 2010, just because there's Cabernet Franc in the vineyard. Zero experience with Cabernet Franc or anything, just treats it as any other red wine. And what comes out underneath his hands is something I still remember as a sommelier tasting the 2010 Cabernet Franc Cuvée Madeleine. And I was like, what is this? It is a wild child in the best possible sense. Now, another 11 years in, and we made a lot of different Cabernet Francs. I will take anybody, and I would argue with anybody about, you may call it the king or the queen of Niagara. It is not Pinot. It is Cabernet Franc. The capacity for this grape to express different growing seasons, different vintages, different age of the vines, with eloquence and subtlety and nuance the way it does. That is a statement of what is the grape that can help you understand the region. It has the same eloquence, the same transparency as Riesling does in the Moselle, as Pinot does in Burgundy. Like for Niagara, it's Cabernet Franc, like bar none. And I always say, it's like, if I'm trying to be politically correct, I would say we're one of the top 5 or 3 regions in the world for Cabernet Franc. What I truly believe, and not as a native of Ontario, as I said, I'm Bulgarian, is that this is the best region in the world for Cabernet Franc. And even in a cool, like the one that you have, it's 2019, very challenging vintage. Like we lost 2 of our vineyards to disease in 2019. Extremely, like one of the worst vintages ever. And what you have in your glasses is a wine that to me carries so much, how do I put it? Like it carries so much suaveness, and it's so smooth. And even in a cool vintage, it has meat and beautiful aromatics that you cannot find anywhere else. We happen to be like quite privileged in terms of having friends all over the world, including in France, in the Loire, in Italy, in Northern Italy, where Cabernet Franc is grown, because the agents that represent us, they represent a lot of these producers. And we travel, like obviously in order to visit clients there, and represent the wines. And we visited winemakers along the way extensively. And one of the most often heard feedback that we have about the Cabernet Franc is we didn't know Cabernet Franc can do this. And that again stands in not necessarily stark contradiction, but in differentiation of how people appreciate Niagara wine in here, as opposed to how it's being experienced in the old world, where there they recognize the quality of the wine right away, and what they're smitten by is the character. And that character, I always say, it is not us, that is Niagara. While here, a lot of the time, because the character is unusual, comparatively speaking, to what already exists as a reference, it will be used as a, what's it called? Like as a put down point. It's like, oh, this is not what, pardon me, Chardonnay, Riesling, Cabernet Franc is supposed to taste like. Wow, in Europe, they say it's like, we didn't know it can taste like that. And the capacity for these grapes to express press in a different shape and form, that is the beginning of terroir. Because I always take it to my old colleagues, the sommeliers, like in a very simple way. It's like, if you didn't know Chablis and Meursault were made from the same grape, would you consider them like, typical expression of Chardonnay? No, you wouldn't. That is terroir. So when we in Niagara are capable of producing something singular, like, why wouldn't we celebrate it? Why would we aspire to resemble rather than being? Because in Europe, they seem to appreciate that. And Cabernet Franc is the most powerful. I mean, it never, like, Riesling is the other one in terms of whites, but like Cabernet Franc is by far the one that turns the most heads. And again, this is the 2019, comes from the vineyard that we took over. We have a 10-year-old lease on it, and it's on red soils, meaning when you have red in the soils, it's iron, hence the label. It's like that bricky label. And even if you were to drive by the vineyards, when it's not covered in grass like now, you can see how the soils are like that same color, brick red. And it's a completely different expression of Cabernet Franc than we have in the rest of our vineyards. And again, talking about the name, Ressac means riptide or surf. And that is a reference towards the way this wine comes at you, because it's not in a straight line. It's not in a attacking kind of way. It wraps around and like just pulls you in. It's the next vintage, the 2020 of the same cuvee, it's still aging. It's in a very weird spot right now, but I would say that currently the Ressac would be the wine that we open like here in the winery for ourselves most often, because it's, again, you can drink it without thinking about it, but you can sink into it and enjoy it. And it's going to be, it is not, it's going to be, it is extremely dynamic when it comes to food pairings.
So unfortunately, it's getting a little bit later in terms of time. I've been having lots of fun, and I know that Mr. Lai, I think he had mentioned the rosé, so I'll just really quickly show the bottle I got when I went to Pearl this summer, and I agree that the rosés are amazing. Are they the future of Niagara? I think we can kind of conclude on that question, if you don't mind, Svetlana. What do you think is the future, not just for Pearl Morissette, but also for Niagara? And would you agree that rosés are part of that? And this was related to the virus question, which I had missed when I initially had read it.
I hope that the future of Niagara is honest winemaking. It's I hope that despite the fact that it's still a very, very young region, in winemaking terms, like 30 years is absolutely nothing. I always tell the story that in the career, let's say, of a bread maker, 30 to 40 years, 5 days a week, however many loaves you make, that is like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tries that you do and you learn from almost immediately. In a career of a winemaker, 30 years is 30 tries. That is it, and that is all. and the lessons are not immediate either. We still are learning from the wines, the first wines that we made here, because wine is a living, breathing thing, and it takes years to understand everything that it has to give you. So the only way to speed up that process, if at all possible, is to be as honest as possible, and to stop emulating and imitating as quickly as you possibly can, because that will allow for you to open the doors towards understanding what is right in front of you and may not fit in any pre-existing mode, but is just as valuable. I always say, like, the references that are out there in the world are not references because they're more singular than any other place. It's their references because a lot of people have paid a lot of attention to them for a very long amount of time. And it's not that the monks in Burgundy or in Germany woke up one day and said, it's Pinot Noir here, it's Chardonnay there, this is Premier Cru, this is Grand Cru. No, it all happens over time. And it all happens as, again, as an intelligent response to the environment, and as recognition of what the environment is able to give you that enriches your life, regardless of how different it is. So here in Niagara, the capacity, the potential is immense. And the moment the emulation and imitation gives way to actual exploration is the moment we will make leaps forward into bringing wines of incredible like character and like pleasure, and discovering what this is all about. You know, I still remember, this is my last anecdote, like when I was tasting a Riesling with a few years ago now with a master sommelier, and again, like the Riesling for us, it's a little bit of a, it's not a sore point, it's actually a very proud point, because it's poured all over Michelin star restaurants in Germany. But it's unusual for Niagara because it's completely dry, whatever, it's completely different in character. And he's saying, it's like, I just can't wrap my head around it, what's going on? And I said, like, well, like, what is the problem? And he's like, I don't know. And I said, like, well, is the wine like sound, meaning like are there no flaws? And he's like, yeah. Like, is it delicious? Yes. Do you enjoy drinking it? Yes. So what is the problem then? And he said to me, it's like, I cannot reference it, I cannot put it in a frame. And I said to him, well, that sounds a lot like a personal problem and not like the wine's problem. Because the fact that you cannot catalog something, that you cannot put it under a heading in a wine book that you read, what about the possibility that the next chapter is being written right now? And for me, that's what can happen in Niagara, as long as the emulation and imitation takes a back step and allows for the actual exploration and ownership of the character of what Niagara gives you, you can write the next chapter. You know, California, like, fine wines did not exist until like 30 years ago. It's as simple as that. Like, no region in the world has the monopoly on quality. Like, there is a million different combinations between soil, climate, and human attention that can produce amazing quality. So it's up to us to make it happen.
That's, you know what? I think that's pretty much one of the coolest things I've heard. I was paying quite close
Thank you.
attention, and you know, I'll just myself conclude on saying this is that, you know, as a wine club, we get to talk to regions that have been around for, you were talking about Burgundy, you know, it's centuries. We're literally looking at a country, not just Niagara, not just Ontario, but a country that is
Yeah.
just starting its wine journey. And it's so
Mhm.
cool to have you explain that to us and how excited and fun it is for you, but also for us. I hope you enjoyed. I hope all of you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please send us your questions. I have a feeling that Svetlana is going to really enjoy answering them, and we're going to enjoy
Yes.
reading them too.
Don't
So,
hesitate. I mean, Joao and Hannes have my email. Please don't hesitate to send any questions my way. I'm very, very happy to nerd out with anyone. I truly am. And if you're ever coming to visit here in Niagara, again, don't hesitate to reach out. If I'm on the property, I would absolutely love to show you around.
thank you so much, everyone. So I guess we'll conclude on that. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Svetlana,
Oh.
is it possible? How do we get the cases of Lila?
So I will Svetlana at pearlmorissette.com.
Okay.
Just
Right.
email me and I'll make it happen. Yeah, do you so Svetlana, you know how to spell Svetlana, and then
Yes.
pearlmorissette.com. Yeah. Just
Okay.
email me. It's like that. That would be no problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice meeting you guys, and I hope I'm really happy that somebody outside of the OVB group has Lila.
It's literally one of our favorites, and that's I mean, that's saying a lot because we absolutely love, we haven't had a Pearl Morissette wine that we haven't, I mean, absolutely adored. It's interesting because I like wines. I've never ever in my life enjoyed all the wines from a producer. I usually like this and not like the others. I've just never had a bad bottle of Pearl Morissette. And I think he kind of explained to us why. It's really literally, they're different, they have different characters, but just the quality and the craftsmanship, it's literally, every single bottle, we get some of the wines that you send as part of your club. And so we tried a lot of them. They're just all ridiculously good. And no, we're not a show, I promise you.
Thank you very much. But this is what, I always used to say, well, I still say to this day, that we never make wines, I said it earlier, for the market. We just make wines for ourselves. And depending on your interpretation of who we are, you may consider us either arrogant or confident in believing that true wine and true craftsmanship will reach out to people, will touch them, and will bring them to you, and it will do what wine does, create a community of people that somehow, whether consciously or subconsciously, share the same ideas of beauty, the same attitude towards the world. And honestly, 2 days ago, somebody asked me, it's like, who's your marketing department? And I'm like, marketing department? I'm like, you're looking at it. It's like, I'm the one that writes the newsletters. We don't do any of that. We just talk about what we do, and we are as honest as we know how to be. We don't hide anything. We're like, whatever we know about ourselves, we'll tell you. And the way Pearl Morissette's gained ground over the years is through people that just tasted the wines, and without knowing or needing to know why, been attracted to them and been attracted to the spirit that informs them. And there is no better compliment that we can possibly receive. Even like in a vintage like this one that we just lived / suffered through, like you cannot imagine how wonderful it is to see people react to your wines, because it makes it all worth it. Because you know it's not a product of anything else but what you put into the wines. It's not marketing. It's not anything like this.
No. Well, thank you so much. Well, we will thank you for shorting aloe for some of our wine.
No, Bar Isabel. Bar Isabel is called.
Or is it Bar Isabel? Is that where it is?
Yeah, Bar Isabel is called shorting.
Yeah.
They'll
Well,
live.
We'll
They'll
also
survive.
see you at the restaurant. We're going to be there
Next
coming up
month.
Next
And
month.
as I said to everyone, don't reach out, like don't hesitate to reach out when you're around, like, because I'm here about 90% of the time. So if you reach out in advance and I'm around, I would love to show you around.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Cheers.
My pleasure. Have a great one.
Bye.